It was about the worst thing that could ever happen to a family. A child had gone peacefully off to bed. The next morning, her mother would find her dead, and her favorite uncle would be devastated.
She was crying, screaming, and I asked her what was wrong. And she told me that Valin was dead.
Not only dead, but murdered, according to police, who were quick to come up with a culprit, that very same uncle.
He kept screaming at me that they have evidence that I did this and I did that. And with every accusation, I'd respond back with, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. It wasn't me. I don't know what you got, but it wasn't me.
For more than 12 years, he would be locked away, while his family would be ripped apart by suspicion and doubt.
Had my brother thinking that I killed his little girl. Had me thinking that he killed his little girl because I knew I didn't kill her.
Valin Johnson was just 4 years old when she died, a short life with very long-lasting repercussions. Good evening and welcome to the Fifth Estate. I'm Gillian Findlay. In 1993, William Mullins-Johnson was jailed for the sexual assault and murder of his niece Valin. From the moment he was arrested, through his trial and conviction, and for every day he sat in prison, he insisted, as so many convicts do, that the justice system had made a colossal mistake. But this time, 12 long years later, he was proven right. You may have heard of the Mullins-Johnson case. He was eventually acquitted and received a formal apology. But what you don't know, can't know, is the price he paid for that mistake and how he wasn't the only victim. His family was never incarcerated, but in so many ways they were in prison too, overwhelmed by hatred and anger and guilt. Tonight, we'll tell you the real story of William Mullins-Johnson's wrongful conviction, the real price that is still being paid. It's a story of what happens to the victims of our judicial system, the people who forever live the consequences when justice goes wrong. Life was probably never going to be easy for Lorena Hill and her boys. Born into the Batchewana band near Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, she chased jobs and dreams to various towns before returning home to raise her sons on her own. Of the four, Bill always stuck out as different. He was tall for his age, unusually tall, which led some to expect too much. But Bill also had a stutter, which left even close relatives expecting too little.
My family, my brothers and some of my sisters considered him retarded, and they never treated him properly.
One who did treat him well, who protected him, was his older brother Paulie.
I don't know why they were so close. Paulie was a very quiet person. He kept things to himself, but yet he used to talk to Bill. But as the years go by, they grew closer and closer.
And as the years went by, they relied on each other more and more. At 18, Bill was convicted of armed robbery, spent 15 months in jail. As he struggled to get his life going again, it was Paul he turned to, moving in with him and with Kim Manitowabi, Paul's partner at the time, and mother of their 3 children.
We all got along. We got along really well.
And you trusted him?
Yes, I did.
He babysat often?
Yeah, actually he did. They loved Billy. All 3 of them.
And he loved them. He had a special relationship with Jean, the oldest. He was her godfather. But as Bill remembers it, it was Jean's little sister Valin who seemed most taken with him.
There were times when I'd just pretend to ignore her, and she wouldn't shut up until she got my attention. She'd just stand there and just point and pull at me, uncle, 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 you know. And then finally I'd snap back, what then? And then she'd laugh, and she'd tell me about something. Mm-hmm. And then she'd be off again.
Still, it wasn't all smiles in Paul's home. He and Kim had a stormy relationship. Even his mother could see things were wrong.
Paul's house was a dangerous household. He was into drugs, selling drugs out of his home. I was afraid they'd raid the house, police would raid, the kids would be taken, that sort of thing.
So it is ironic, given what was to come, that Lorena was relieved when Bill moved in.
Not that I'm saying Billy is a goody two-shoes, that sort of thing, but he was protection in my eyes. I figured he was.
Protection for who?
For the kids, to watch over. He watched over them.
And that's what he was doing on that last Saturday in June 1993. Paul was playing in a baseball tournament that weekend. Kim had taken the children along to play while Bill stayed home to start supper. He'd promised to babysit later so that Paul and Kim could return for an evening game.
Here's your glasses.
Oh, dear me.
As they settled in for an evening of TV, it all seemed so normal. The only unusual thing was that Valin, who'd been running a fever lately, was tired.
Valin was sleeping on the couch. Like they usually had an 8 o'clock bedtime. She was sleeping on the couch at 7:30. She was tired that night. So I sent her up to her room by herself, you know.
Half an hour later, Bill carried 3-year-old John upstairs.
I walked by the girls' room and Valin was in her bed sleeping, so I shut her door.
What happened after is both a mystery and a turning point. A little girl went to bed. The next morning, her mother found her dead, and nothing would ever be the same again.
I could see her face is purple and she's not breathing. And there's vomit all over her face.
Kim come tearing down the stairs, yelling, screaming, crying that Valin's dead, she was saying. It's kind of hard to go back over that sometimes, you know, because I could still see her little face, her way, her hair. Excuse me.
We assumed, or I assumed, I guess, well, most people there at the time thought she choked on vomit. That's what we thought.
And that may have been a logical assumption, but it's not one they were making across town at the hospital morgue. By midday, pathologist Dr. Bhupendra Razaya began the autopsy to determine how and when Valin died. It didn't take him long to suspect it wasn't of natural causes. As a police officer took notes, Razaya found bruises on Valin's thighs and on her vagina. A sexual assault kit was ordered, and police officers who had left Paul's house all of a sudden reappeared.
The police came back, and 2 detectives, and they told everyone to leave the house. They put everybody out, and they made Paulie, Billy, and Kim in the house, and they locked them in, but everybody else had to go.
Back at the hospital, pathologist Razaya clearly had a theory. He consulted 2 doctors specializing in sexual abuse, one by phone who said it not only sounded like abuse, but chronic abuse. The other doctor, who examined the body but had no experience in pathology, went further, calling it the worst case of anal penetration she'd seen. 5 hours later, Dr. Razaya made his conclusions. According to that police officer's notes, Valin had suffocated from force applied to her chest. As for the crucial question of when, Dr. Razaya estimated a narrow 2-hour window between 8 and 10 the night before, the very time that Bill Mullins-Johnson had been babysitting alone. An hour later, he was under arrest.
I knew my life was over right there. That's when my life ended.
As for Valin's father, Paul, it was bad enough his daughter was gone, but now they were telling him she'd been sexually abused for months. Of everything he'd been told that day, that was perhaps the hardest.
Because if this was actually going on, how did I not see it?
William Mullins-Johnson was charged with aggravated sexual assault and first-degree murder. What the police wanted now was a confession.
I had to battle hard and keep my wits about me, my mind about me. And any cop that would come near me in the holding cell, I would scream at him, I didn't do it, and I just kept it up. Welton even went as far as to say that he had my semen off of Valin. I said, oh yeah, then fucking prove it. Fucking prove it, I told him. I said, I don't know whose semen or pubic hair you have, I said, but it certainly hell ain't mine. I'll take any fucking test you want.
In 1993, Sault Ste. Marie was a place full of suspicion. It was the times. Everyone, it seemed, was on the lookout for sexual predators. The police, the courts, child welfare. So when little Valin Johnson was found dead in her bed, the first instinct was, in the words of lawyer Jenny Reed, to think dirty.
As soon as somebody raised the issue of sexual assault, all of a sudden it became a murder. And all common sense went out the window. And the fact that you have a dead 4-year-old who's allegedly been sexually assaulted and murdered, you know, they just want someone to pay. They want someone to be responsible.
The Mullins-Johnson family, most of all. Valin's Uncle Bill had no sooner been charged with her assault and murder when his mother walked in on a family conference. Her brother, a police officer himself, was counseling relatives.
And I could hear him telling everyone in the living room to talk to their kids, to everyone to talk to their kids, and to let him know which one of them that Billy had molested. That's what he was telling all my brothers and sisters in the living room. And I went in and I just began screaming at him, asking, what the hell's the matter with you?
For Lorena, it was one more thing tearing her apart. Valin was her granddaughter. Bill was the son she'd always protected. She wanted to believe he was innocent, but she had to go to jail to see him, to be sure.
The first time I met, it was behind glass. I couldn't touch him or anything. And I had to know. I asked him and looked right into his eyes. I said, did you do this to Valin? And the look came over his face and, no way, Mama, no way. And I heard him when I asked him. I know I did. Because the hurt was just plain. And the tears just rolled down his face. And there I was apologizing to beat all hell for asking him in the first darn place. But I had to. What else was I going to do?
Other family members didn't even bother to ask. On the day Valin was buried, Bill made a phone call to his grandparents. And what did you expect to hear when you placed that call?
I expected to hear a lot of, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. But I didn't. My grandmother pretty much dropped the phone. Refused to talk to me. Because it's right from that day that I knew the family closed ranks on me. That's when it finally hit home. That they turned their back on me.
By the time the trial started the following September, not much had changed. Bill's mother sat on one side of the courtroom, everyone else on the other. There was no physical evidence linking Bill to Valin's death. That pubic hair police told him they'd found was, in the end, neither pubic nor even human. What the Crown had was a circumstantial case that his lawyers would fight by appealing to reasonable doubt. If indeed Valin had been murdered, why was Bill the suspect? Lawyer Jenny Reed was part of his defense team.
And the theory of the Crown was that, that Billy, while he was babysitting, sexually assaulted and killed Valin. And so we would be challenging the premise that he had exclusive opportunity. There were other witnesses that were around or other people that were in and out of the house that night.
There were other people as well who lived in the house. After all, the evidence was going to be that Valin's abuse had been chronic. As he sat in jail awaiting his trial, that's the thought that haunted Bill. He knew he wasn't guilty, so who was? It was then that terrible suspicion began to take hold. If he hadn't molested and killed the little girl, then maybe the other man in the house had. Valin's father, his closest brother, Paul.
And I told my lawyers, well, you know what? If it leads to Polly, then it leads to Polly. But I didn't do this.
But you believed it might be possible?
Yes.
That Polly would have abused and killed his own daughter?
Yep. They were already convinced that I did it already. Well, I didn't do it. What if it was Polly?
Bill's lawyers, their job was to try to get Bill off, and if need be, to point the finger of suspicion somewhere else.
Yeah.
And one of their strategies, as I understand, was
coming after me. Yeah. Yeah, when I was right on the stand, that's when I realized that they were going to come after me too now.
In fact, there was no more evidence linking Paul to Valin's death than there was Bill, and so the trial came back to that original autopsy. Graphic photographs were entered showing what appeared to be bruises around her neck and chest. And more experts were called, among them Dr. Charles Smith, at the time considered the top child forensic pathologist in the country, a defense lawyer's nightmare.
Dr. Smith was a very, very difficult witness to pin down. He's a very confident, very arrogant when he testifies, very sophisticated individual, very slick, and we did our best.
On the stand, Smith not only backed up the local pathologist's findings of asphyxiation and abuse, he tightened the noose even further. There was evidence, he said, that Valin died within minutes of being sodomized. Death in the commission of a sexual assault is always murder in the first degree. If Bill were convicted, he would be going away for life. For the jury, and in particular for jury member April Weaver, the experts were convincing.
In my mind, it came down to what we were told of the forensic evidence. And 4-year-old little girls don't die for nothing. And we were told it was trauma, somebody had to do it. And timelines, he was the only one that was in the home. So it was like, it didn't, I felt like it didn't give us any other choice. I wouldn't have left the courtroom if I thought at all that there was a doubt in my head. I would not have had anyone in the world would not have coerced me to change my decision.
But you still cry when you think of this. Why?
Well, because I know now I was wrong.
In the end, it took the jury 9.5 hours to return with its verdict, to condemn a man and to break a family.
Because when they pronounced me guilty, I remember I turned around in the prisoner's box, and me and Paulie locked eyes like you wouldn't believe. From what I saw on Paulie's face was, "You're a fucking piece of shit." I thought he was going to come at me. Yeah. And I looked at him and I just yelled at him, "I didn't do it."
He looked right at me in the courtroom. He turned right to me. And then, well, who can I believe here now? I want to believe your brother, but they're showing evidence that it's true, that I have to not believe him now.
For the brothers who had once been so close, it was over.
So right there, the relationship with me and Paulie, for the most part, ended right there.
For lawyer Jenny Reed, the loss was devastating, especially since she knew the life sentence did not have to be. Even before the trial began, the Crown had offered a deal. If Bill would plead guilty, they'd reduce the charge to manslaughter.
I don't recall if the sentence offered was 5 years, but it wasn't outrageous, and we certainly had to put it to Billy because of obviously he's facing a life in prison without parole for 25 years. Manslaughter seems like a pretty sweet offer under the circumstances.
I said, if the Crown comes to you with a deal like that, you tell him to stick it up his ass. Because I didn't do it. And I'm not going to admit that I did when I know that's a lie. I will not go to jail for something I didn't do. They're going to have to put me there.
And so they did. William Mullins-Johnson was 24 years old when he went to prison for the murder of his niece. He'd be twice that old before he'd even be eligible for parole. From the moment he walked in, he knew he was a marked man.
My life is now in danger by anybody who wanted to earn their prison stripes, their badge of honor. Get the child killer.
Of his large extended family, only his mother, Lorena, would ever visit. Loyalty for which she paid a heavy price.
No one can ever understand what shunning means until it is done to you.
The rest of her family, including her other sons and their families, couldn't understand. Bill was guilty. The courts had said so. Paul's partner Kim wasn't just baffled, she was angry. Her children had lost a sister. Now it seemed they were losing a grandmother too.
She abandoned my kids. I couldn't care less about me. We got along, but if you're going to pick your son instead of your grandchildren, you go right ahead. But they needed her at the time, and she picked Billy.
How did the boys take that? How did Paulie take that?
Paulie found his relief at the end of a bottle. Many's still there, I understand.
For Bill, relief was harder to come by. What kept him going were his appeals. But when even the Supreme Court of Canada turned him down, death no longer seemed such a frightening option.
Just slashing up, slitting my wrists, putting them in warm water in the sink and just dropping right there. That's what I thought about. I thought,
So it was with no real expectation that he turned to a volunteer legal organization called AIDWIC, the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted. For 4 years, he got little more than Christmas cards, until one day, he got a visitor.
I wasn't expecting anybody that day. I got a page over the intercom. A lawyer was here to see me. So I went down there, and it turned out to be David Bayless.
He was very poised and calm, but you could see that there was a seething bitterness going on there. He was not happy. And he wasn't happy with us because, you know, we had had his case for 4 years at that point, and nothing was happening.
What AIDWIC had come to tell Bill was that in fact they thought his case had promise, but they were frustrated. They'd been trying to get tissue samples from that original autopsy to have them reanalyzed. The Sault Ste. Marie pathologist, Dr. Razaya, said he didn't have them. He'd passed them on to that famous expert witness, Dr. Charles Smith. For almost 2 years, Smith insisted he couldn't find them either, until eventually the coroner's service forced the issue. Smith's office was searched, and guess what was found? The samples were then given to Ontario's chief pathologist to look at, and that is when this story changed. According to the report by Dr. Michael Polanin, every big conclusion that Smith and others had drawn from that autopsy was wrong. Little Valin Johnson had not been abused, not before she died, not chronically. In fact, there was absolutely no evidence to say she'd been murdered at all.
I'll never forget the day I found his report on my desk. I didn't even know who Michael Polanin was. And I remember reading through it, and just it was almost, I couldn't assimilate what I was reading. You know, we'd been trying so hard, we'd been up against a wall for so long, and here was somebody from the coroner's office saying this was not a murder. It was all a big mistake.
A big mistake. It was easy to say, but how had the experts gotten it so wrong? As Dr. Polanin would later explain, it all started with that notion of think dirty and the misinterpretations it led to.
If they misinterpret that hemorrhage as bruising, you may misinterpret evidence for strangulation.
Those marks on Valin's neck and chest, concluded to be bruises, were in fact pools of blood that only occur after death, either naturally or as a result of the autopsy itself. Her enlarged anus, concluded to be the result of sodomy, was the inevitable result of muscle tissue dying. So sure were the original pathologists that the worst had happened, they disregarded the possibility that Valin might have died of natural causes. Dr. Polanin couldn't conclude that either. Too much time had passed. What he could say was that there was no evidence anyone had killed Valin Johnson, a conclusion that would be corroborated by no fewer than 5 leading international pathologists. The news was delivered to Bill in prison by AIDWIC lawyer James Lockyer.
When he tried to explain what these reports meant, it was like I had a short circuit in my brain, you know, because I kept asking James about, well, what about this person, what about that person, what about this situation, to the point where he actually literally grabbed my wrist and said, listen to what I'm telling you. She was never molested, and nobody killed her. And I just sat there, and I was just stunned. I didn't know what to think.
You must have been angry. I mean,
I
as it
was.
sunk in.
Oh yeah. And so I was angry that I knew I was wrongly convicted, but now to add onto it, I'm starting to get angry that there was no crime, and there was no reason for me to go through what I went through. No reason at all for my family to go through what they went through, you know, because I went through hell. I could only imagine what Polly went through.
The hell is living with that your brother's a murderer, and he murdered your daughter in her own bed. And none of it was true. Not one word of it. That's hell. Making you believe, making someone that you love all your life turn around, now you hate them. That's hell.
On September 21st, 2005, 4,466 days after he first went to jail, Bill Mullins-Johnson was released on bail.
I was terrified. I was terrified. Well, when we come down the escalators to go out the doors, James told me, "You see all that press out there? They're here for you." And I just stopped there for a while, because I knew the press was there. I looked up at the sky. Not a cloud in the sky that day. I couldn't believe the colors. The last 12 years has been nothing but hell for me and my family. When I got swarmed by all that press, I was hoping to hold it together, but I couldn't. I hope that my family comes to understand. I hope they understand that nothing was done to my niece. Not by me, and not by anybody else.
This is CBC News Morning. These are brand new pictures we want to show you. This is William Mullins-Johnson heading into the Ontario Court of Appeal, hoping for exoneration today. His lawyers and the rest of his team.
2 years later, the courts would officially acquit him of Valin's murder, and the apologies would begin.
We allow the appeal, we quash the conviction, and we had a verdict of acquittal. And I'd add this, Mr. Mullins-Johnson, that it is regrettable that as a result of the flawed pathological evidence, you were wrongfully convicted and you spent so long in custody.
Then came the province.
On behalf of the Ministry of the Attorney General, I wish to extend our sincere, our profound, and our deepest apologies.
It was all cause for celebration, but the apologies Bill really wanted to hear were from those who had been so instrumental in putting him in prison in the first place. Last January, he found himself face to face with one of them, the now discredited Dr. Charles Smith.
I am here to take full responsibility for my work.
Dr. Smith had made so many mistakes on so many cases, his work was now the subject of a public inquiry. Bill knew his lawyer was going to ask for an apology.
Can you look at Mr. Mullins-Johnson, sir, and say that to him directly?
I could.
The man who had been so quick to condemn him all those years before now took a full 43 seconds to get the words out.
Sir, I don't expect that you would forgive me. But I do want to make it. I'm sorry. I do want to make it very clear to you that I am profoundly sorry for the role that I played in the ultimate decision that affected you. I am sorry.
As he was sitting there, appearing very genuine, appearing very distraught, offering you his apology, what were you thinking?
Bullshit. That was the most false thing I've ever seen in my life. But I had to accept it for my own sake. You destroyed my family, my brother's relationship with me and my niece. that's still living and my nephew that's still living. They hate me because of what you did to me. I'll never forget that, but for my own hearing, I must forgive you.
That is kind of you, thank you.
As for everyone else who was wrong, all the other so-called experts, none of them has ever said anything to Bill. Certainly not the man who started it all. Dr. Bhupendra Razaya is still a pathologist at the Sault Ste. Marie Hospital. Dr. Razaya, good morning. I'm Gillian Findlay from the Fifth Estate. How do you do?
Fine, good morning.
Good morning. We'd like to and still insists that on the Valin Johnson case, he was absolutely right. And we'd like to talk to you about it. You were instrumental in his conviction. We'd like to know how you got the case so wrong and what you say to the man who went to jail for so many years.
I was never wrong. All the findings I did was absolutely correct. My conclusions are correct. Unfortunately, if you look at many of the expert reports, you'll notice there are a lot of problems with it. And I have no further comments to make.
Well, there's half a dozen international experts who said you were wrong, sir. Well, Mr. Mullins-Johnson spent 12 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, according to the courts. Do you feel any personal responsibility for that?
I don't feel any personal responsibility at all, as I mentioned to you before. But who's thinking about Valin Johnson, who died? Are you?
Well, what about Mr. Johnson, who the courts have said was innocent in that case?
I have no comment to make, as I said.
You feel no personal responsibility?
No personal responsibility whatsoever at all, because all my observations and conclusions are correct.
According to who, Dr. Razaya?
Well, according to me and according to the experts. If you look at the expert reports, you'll see nearly all of them agree with many of my findings in the report.
I have looked at the experts.
Well, you haven't looked at it carefully enough.
So how do you measure the price of a wrongful conviction? Well, maybe it's in the way your family thinks about you, even after you're free.
If I had a gun, I would kill him.
Today?
Yeah.
It's been more than 3 years since Bill Mullins-Johnson walked out of prison, and on the surface, life looks good.
Bite something like that.
He has a girlfriend, Mel Dabaski, who's given him a ready-made family, and he has plans to return to school.
Okay. Hold it here like this. That way, and just go like that, see?
But as hungry as he is to make up the 12 years he lost, she knows that in so many ways, he's still the scared 22-year-old whose life was destroyed the day his little niece died.
Oh, easy, Jude, easy now. Easy, Jude.
I can really tell emotionally how we're on different levels. And so when we do, butt heads, I have to remind myself, okay, emotionally, this is the age he's at and how much younger he is than I am.
Now I got you. See? Hold that, get you. I'm going to pile drive you now. I got you.
As for his family, well, that's still a work in progress.
You want barbecue sauce on these steaks, Bill?
I don't know.
You want some barbecue sauce on these steaks? Or
sure.
Just...
Having spent so many years divided and angry at each other, there are attempts to reconcile. A family barbecue to celebrate Bill's 38th birthday this fall.
Les, take a peek and see if the water's boiling on the stove for the tea.
But it's hard, especially for his mother, Lorena. When Bill was released and decided to live in Toronto, she moved south to help him. Now she's back in Sault Ste. Marie trying to piece a family back together.
Are you going to put some of the ribs on?
Well, where are they?
They're in the oven, my son.
Get them in.
Every family has a center. I'm the center of my family. And I told Billy I just had to go home. Even if the boys weren't going to talk to me, I was going to be here. And we're going to have to try and do something to fix things.
I never talked to anybody about any of this before, ever. Not even my brothers, not even my mom, nobody.
Paul now accepts that Bill did not kill his daughter. It's the next generation, his other children, that he worries about. You've told them that you believe Bill?
Yeah.
Have you told them they have nothing to fear from him?
Yeah, but they're still scared. Like, they're still scared.
Do they tell you what they're scared of, specifically?
Well, look at what they went through. All this belief, all this what they're going through. Since they were small, like, They believed it all their lives.
Valin's sister Jean and little brother John are now adults, but still so confused.
Like, if I had a gun, I would kill him.
Today?
Yeah.
That's a very powerful thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't say that lightly, I don't think.
No.
You're still that angry at him, even though...
Not just at him. I'm not just angry at him. I wouldn't feel this way if he wasn't sent to prison, if they did their job right and he didn't go. I just think that that's the reason why. Because people don't just go to jail for no reason. They do something.
Bill knows he'll never escape the stain of suspicion, but the fact it comes even from his own goddaughter is harsh. Have you tried to speak to her?
No. She's a grown woman. I can't force anybody to do anything. It's a part of my life that I miss, seeing her, and, you know, I do miss her and I do love her. But she's a grown woman now and she has to make her own choices.
That's gotta hurt.
That's life. All I could do is hope that she finally sees one day that I am innocent.
Yeah, he's sleeping. Out? You want him out?
Yeah.
No, he's sleeping.
For now, all Jean wants to see is the future. She's a mother herself now,
Be careful with him. Valin.
with a little girl named Valin. You named your own daughter Valin. Why did you do that?
Because everyone forgot about her. And I didn't.
But everyone did not forget, least of all the one who never had a proper chance to mourn her. Have you been to where she's buried?
No. No, I want to go, but I don't know if I'm ready yet. Paulie said he'll come with me anytime I want, and when I'm ready.
A few months ago, he felt ready.
I hope we can find our peace, Valin. I gotta let her go.
Yeah, I had to.
I loved her, Paulie.
I know you did.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
It would be comforting to think that for this man and this family, the worst is over, that healing is just a matter of time.
Yeah.
But life doesn't work that way. Shortly after we left Bill and his new life, he turned up in Toronto, shaken and alone, and for the first time ready to talk about his deeper struggle to be free. Not just family and relationships, but other things, dangerous things. You have a drug problem?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Some of it stems, ironically, from the fact he has been acquitted, but he now feels pressure to be a poster boy for the wrongfully convicted. Like all of us, he wants to believe that injustice can be fixed. But as he uniquely knows, it's just not that easy.
And now that I'm out, I'm suddenly a hero. You know, I'm a hero, so strong, so together, but I'm not. I'm not. But that's the face I always have to put out there. So I'm kind of in the catch-22.
You're worried about slipping,
Yeah.
seem to be slipping.
Yeah.
Why did you agree to talk to us about all of this?
Well, to kind of smash the illusion of what I've been built up to be. People like to put these types of stories in sort of a romanticism kind of thing, you know. At the end of it all, things are in a nice little tidy box, and everything's fine, but everything's not fine, and that's what I'd like people to understand. It's not a rose garden. It's not a happily ever after thing.